so we are picking up where we left off on last time, where last time we learned how to tape our watercolor paper down to a board so it won't buckle while we're working with it. We drew a circle that we divided into 12 pie pieces, and we labeled them red, red, orange, orange, yellow, orange, yellow, yellow, green, green, blue, blue, violet, violet, red, violet. And I'm going to show you how to mix all of these colors from red, yellow, and blue, okay? If you have the 3 primary colors, you can make every color in the rainbow. So we just took carmine red from our kits because that's what we have. Carmine, in this particular watercolor kit, carmine red is the one that's closest to primary red, and we had to take the cap off to figure that out. We looked at the pigment, not at the label, okay? We also chose lemon yellow for our primary yellow, and we chose ultramarine blue for our primary blue, and we did the take the cap off test to look at the pigment, the actual pigment, instead of trying to figure this out from by guessing or looking at the label. The label color is never going to be the actual color, okay? All right, so the first thing that we need to do is get some water in our palette. And we're going to start by just mixing up a little bit of these primary colors. And I'm going to use, let's see, I'm going to use this sort of medium brush. I think this one is a number 4. Do you have a number 4, Caleb? Yes? Okay, because I couldn't remember what numbers you said. All right, and I am going to put it in the water over here and break the binder, because these are brand new brushes, and so they're going to be hard and crispy. We don't want them to be hard and crispy. Then I'm going to drag it on the paper towel. I apologize to those of you who cannot see the paper towel out. Let's see, my camera kind of was falling there. Maybe that's a little better. All right. So, and I'm twirling it to bring it back to a point, okay? Notice I'm not playing with it with my fingers because there's oil in my fingers. Water and oil don't mix, and we're using watercolor paint. So I'm going to take some water and I'm going to put it in this tray next to the red. And once I've got about that much water, it's like half my tray, I'm going to take a tiny little bit of red from that glop that I created. And look at how bright red it is, even though there's so much water, right? And now that I've done that, I am going to very carefully fill in this triangle here. And the way I'm doing that is I'm just kind of pushing the color out to the edges. I'm not trying to draw a line on the edge. I'm pushing the paint along. And I can push it because it's really wet, because I'm using a ton of water. All right? As you learned in the science class, water seeks its own level. And when you run the paint along that edge, you create a sort of imaginary boundary for the paint. And so now I can drop paint inside that anywhere to brighten it up and make it more intense and saturated. And it will not exceed the boundaries that I originally created for it. Okay? Now, this is a great opportunity for me to tell you about one of the realities. And look, I can just sort of move that paint around in here. One of the realities of watercolor paint is that if I were to put paint in this and create a boundary up against this red, the boundary would disappear because it would dissolve, because water seeks its own level, and the red-orange would combine with the red, and I would have no sharp boundary. So this is the perfect way to do a color wheel. You start with red, yellow, and blue, and you've got separation in between your sections, and that way you can let them dry completely before you try to go right next to them. Okay? So now, I'm going to do the same thing I just did. I'm going to grab some water, put it right next to this yellow that I put in there. Create a nice little well. Once I've got it about half full with water, then I'm going to grab some of the yellow and I'm going to add it. And look at how nice and bright that is. And now I'm going to start pushing the paint around inside this yellow section. Whoops, I went a little out of the lines. Doesn't matter. It's okay. And you want to try to be as close to inside the lines as possible, but remember, we are not machines. If we wanted it perfect, we would get a printer and print it out. But that is not what we're doing. And then I just keep going. Now, do you see how your paper is kind of buckling? That's why we taped it down. As it gets wet, it swells, it buckles. When it dries, it shrinks again. Back to its original shape, more or less. All right, now I've got my yellow in there. Same thing for the blue. And I'm going to just keep sticking to this side for the primaries. All right, got enough water in there. Now I'm going to get some blue paint. Stick it in there. And you know what? I've changed my mind about using the ultramarine blue, because the ultramarine blue has a little purple tint to it. What colors do you mix to get purple? Red and blue. So that means there's a little bit of red in there. And I want it to be more of a pure primary blue. So I'm going to try out this Prussian blue, what they're calling Prussian blue. And yes, that does look like, whoops, more of a primary blue. By the way, watercolor is not plastic like acrylic, but it will stain your clothes. Now, the thing about watercolor is it's not usually as messy as acrylic paint. You're not slopping it around and, getting really active with the brush. Watercolor is a much more controlled painting experience. So it's not as messy, you're not as likely to get it on your clothes, but did you notice how I just dropped that tube right on my shirt? And if it had been, squirting, I would have, yeah, that's a better, this is more of a primary blue, that Prussian blue, right there. What they're calling Prussian blue. By the way, the names of the colors are not truly indicative of what the colors are. Okay, and they are not consistent from brand to brand. I mean, this is a brand of watercolors called Sargent Art. It's made for students. And so they're not going to be as meticulous as perhaps Winsor Newton or, you know, some other major watercolor brand for professional artists. So I recommend every time you start a painting, do not rely on the name of the color. Do what I just did. Open the tube, check it out. All right, now I have to let all three of those dry before I paint right next to them. And the logical next step would be for me to mix, actually the logical next step is for me to mix secondary colors. So red, yellow, and blue are the primary colors. What are the secondary colors?
Orange, purple, green.
Right. Or violet. Violet and purple, same, two different names for the same thing. All right, so I'm going to now mix, and how convenient that I have a pie space in between my primary and my secondary so that I can go ahead and do that. So now I'm going to try and mix an orange. But I'm not going to do it in the same pan that I mixed the yellow. I'm going to create another pan of water. Okay. And a secondary color should be an equal mixture of the two primaries that make it. So red and yellow make orange. So I'm going to take a little bit of red, put it in there, rinse my brush before I put it in the yellow so I don't muddy the yellow, and then I'm going to take a little bit of yellow and put it in there. And look at that, lo and behold, I have orange. You know, I think I could add a little more yellow to that. So I'm gonna. There, that's a nice orange right there. That's a nice pumpkin-y orange. In this day and age of seasons and colors, you know, one day you might see pumpkin spice on the color wheel instead of orange. But that's the color you're going for.